Twitter and Facebook may have perpetrated the greatest high crime in the history of the American Republic. Hello, welcome to Dangerous Policy, a channel aimed at intelligent people wanting to discuss important issues facing life and society. My name is Crispin, and as many of you would have at least be peripherally aware, there is an enormous scandal involving overwhelming censorship by Twitter and Facebook to combat an incredibly damaging story that has emerged about one of the presidential candidates. And in doing so, it is highly probable that they have perpetrated a serious crime against American democracy. And there are a lot of stories emerging about it thick and fast. I want to discuss this from the start to finish, peeling back the layers of corruption to show exactly what has happened, allegedly, and for everyone watching to feel fully informed when discussing this issue with others. So if you find value in this video, of all the ones we've created, I would urge you to share this particular video. And in order to even begin to discuss this, I have to talk about a completely separate corruption scandal that feeds into this in an extraordinarily dramatic way. So Joe Biden has a son, Hunter Biden. Now, Hunter is a real lowlife. He's a crackhead. He has all kinds of strings of affairs. He's been involved in all kinds of shady dealings. This is well known. So unlike Donald Trump's children, who are visible and among his most important surrogates, anyone in the Biden campaign keeps Hunter away from literally any form of visibility wherever they can. Now, there is something that is a matter of public record that is from when Joe Biden was vice president of the United States. That's quite important. In around 2013, when Russia went into Crimea, Joe Biden was appointed America's frontman for Ukrainian policy, US policy towards Ukraine. Lo and behold, shortly after that, despite Hunter's many problems, he was appointed to the board of a Ukrainian gas giant, Burisma. This is despite the fact that he has no experience in energy of any kind, cannot speak the language, and the board duties is officially described, I think, as one meeting per year, for which he was paid a fee of $50,000 US per month. Now, that's something that everybody is sort of vaguely familiar with. But Joe Biden has persistently said that he's had no discussions with Hunter about any of his overseas business dealings, and certainly not met anybody involved in any of Hunter's business relationships, that they've been completely separate this whole time. Well, about a year ago, a laptop was handed into a repair shop in the United States. It was never picked up. The owner of the store eventually reviewed the laptop and found a massive trove of emails, images, videos that made it abundantly clear that this belonged to Hunter Biden. The FBI came and seized the laptop, but not before a copy was made of the hard drive. Now, that hard drive was then found its way to the New York Post, which about a week ago started publishing amazing information involving Joe Biden and his son Hunter. The first big story that came out, and they're still coming out, and we'll get to that. The first big story that came out suggested that Hunter received messages from the senior executives of Burisma saying that they had been investigated by a state prosecutor for corruption, which they said was politically motivated, of course, and that they wanted America to intervene. Another email came to Hunter thanking him for the opportunity to meet his father in the United States and hope to continue doing business in the future. Now, as another matter of public record, and we might even be able to bring the footage up because it's extraordinary, in 2018, Joe Biden bragged publicly, the Council of Foreign Relations, about going to the Ukraine and demanding that the state prosecutor in Ukraine be fired, or else the Ukrainian government would not receive $1 billion in aid.
I remember going over convincing our team, or others too, convincing us that we should be providing for loan guarantees. And I went over for, I guess, the 12th, 13th time to Kyiv, and I was supposed to announce that there was another $1 billion loan guarantee. And I had gotten a commitment from Poroshenko and from Yatsenyuk that they would take action against the state prosecutor, and they didn't. So they said they were walking out to press conference. I said, no, I said, I'm not going to, or we're not going to give you the $1 billion. They said, you have no authority. You're not the president. The president said. I said, call him. I said, I'm telling you, you're not getting the $1 billion. I said, you're not getting the $1 billion. I'm going to be leaving here. And I think it was, 6 hours? I looked, I said, I'm leaving in 6 hours. If the prosecutor's not fired, you're not getting the money. Well, son of a bitch. Got fired. And they put in place someone who was solid.
It's a very strange thing for a vice presidential candidate, vice president to do, as in to actually go and say, you have to fire a public official in your country, otherwise we're going to deny you $1 billion in aid. Anyway, lo and behold, the prosecutor was fired. The investigation into Burisma was immediately ended for the duration of the Obama presidency. Incidentally, once Trump was elected, the investigation was reopened and the Burisma executives have since fled to Monaco. But at the time, Hunter delivered. Biden used American foreign policy and the threat of withholding taxpayer money to benefit the financial dealings and ensuring the continued support for his son Hunter, so Hunter could continue to trade illegally and corruptly on his last name. So that was the allegation that was released by the New York Post publicly. But that is not even the crime that I'm talking about. Now, by the way, the Biden campaign has not contested any of these facts. Let me say that again. The Biden campaign has confirmed, essentially, that Hunter was on the board of Burisma despite having no qualifications. They even conceded that it is possible that Biden met with these individuals that he was thanked for, despite the fact Biden has made consistent denials. The only thing that the Biden campaign has officially denied is that the reason Biden had this state prosecutor fired was because of their investigation into Burisma. That's the only thing they've denied because, of course, if they conceded that point, there would be no presidential candidacy for Biden. He would be in prison for the rest of his life. But when this story was published, immediately, before it was independently fact-checked by their own people, and despite the fact that this was published by a mainstream media organization, both Facebook and Twitter ceased and censored the distribution of this story worldwide. Every account that published this story was blocked. The New York Post's channel was blocked. Every politician who shared it was blocked. This included the US media secretary had their account blocked. And then when the story was copied over to the US Senate Judiciary website, a US government website, the Facebook and Twitter blocked access to the government website on their platform. It was a universal attempt at suppression. Not only that, in its place, to confuse the issue deliberately, they had a unsubstantiated report permanently embedded to try and debunk this allegation. And they had Eric Trump Ukraine scandal as a hashtag trending worldwide, despite having almost no tweets under that hashtag. In other words, to convince people that this was actually about the Trump campaign and the Trump family and not about the Bidens. It is an extraordinary perversion of information and a total violation of the First Amendment of the US Constitution. Now, just to put this in context, the New York Post is the fourth largest media circulation in America. It is a 220-year-old paper, 70 years older than the New York Times. This is not some fringe outlet. And they acquired this material completely legitimately. And again, the Biden campaign have not even been able to deny it. The only way that that this would not critically damage Biden's presidential candidacy is if no one sees it. And so Twitter and Facebook have openly conspired to steal the election effectively by providing an enormous in-kind contribution to the Biden campaign, which they're absolutely not allowed to do under law, and to the extraordinary outrage of anyone who has discovered this. Now, the good news is that a number of US senators, US Senator Josh Hawley, Ted Cruz, and the Judiciary Chairman Graham Lindsay are issuing a subpoena to the CEO of Facebook and Twitter to appear before the US Senate under oath to testify on pain of prosecution for violating high crimes against the United States. This is the biggest story that has unfolded in the internet age. I mean, it is. We've gone from about a year ago, these tech giants censoring people like Alex Jones and Milo Yiannopoulos and these kind of fringe provocateurs to the US government, and this is an open challenge to the American people for the right for their access to information and for their own self-determination. So how illegal is this? Well, Twitter and Facebook claim carrier protections, right? Carrier platform protections. What that means is that they are not liable for the things that other people say on their platform. So if you attack someone else on Twitter, the other, and you defame them and you say terrible things about them and it hurts their reputation and income, well, they can't sue Twitter. They can sue you as the person who made those comments, right? And likewise, a way to think about it would be when you call someone up on the phone. Okay, the phone company doesn't control what you say. It doesn't say, no, you can't say these things. It doesn't, if you call a person they don't like, they don't, shut off your phone or anything like that. They just provide a carrier service. They have no impact on what actually happens. So if someone uses a phone service to commit, say, a terrorist act or communicate and do illegal activity, it's not the phone company that is liable for that. It's the individuals who actually perpetrate it. Another good example is if you publish in a bookstore, right? You write a book, it gets published, and then the bookstores sell it. Well, the bookstore isn't liable for all the words that are written in every book that they stock. You can't sue the bookstore or the chain of bookstores for its distribution and sale. What you can sue is the author and the publisher who had editorial control over that book. Now, that's the critical point here. To be a carrier platform, what defines it is not having editorial control. That means that Twitter and Facebook should not be able to put up warnings or block things or control any aspect of the publication of users communicating with one another. The moment that they do that, they cease to become a carrier platform and instead become a publisher. Like the New York Times can decide not to publish articles. They can decide not to run stories. They can go with whatever slant they want, but they are liable for the things that they do put in there because they have that editorial control. That is the critical difference between those two things. So how has Facebook and Twitter gotten away with it? Because while this is a direct attack in the final weeks of a US presidential election to openly assist one political party to utterly suppress illegal allegations of massive illegal corruption that are totally, as far as we can see, accurate, the only way they could do that is under what is called, euphemistically, the Section 230 exemption of the US Federal Communications Act. What the hell is that? Well, when the internet started to become popular, One of the big fears that people had was for children and people's safety online and being exposed to really harmful and offensive content that was, often directed at individuals. And the example, as was given when the exemption was provided and debated in Congress, was if, a child is being cyberbullied at school and they come home and they're still getting bullied at home, and a distraught parent calls up the say Facebook and says, can you do something about all these messages that my child is getting? Well, in that specific case, Facebook can, if, and this is the critical word, if acting in good faith, can censor those comments for the sake of that person's individual safety, right? It's to say, look, they don't have any censorship rights, but there is an exemption that, if presented with what a reasonable person would say is, a heartless or a painful experience where someone is experiencing harm, it might not be illegal, it might not violate the First Amendment protections of the people expressing it. But nevertheless, in this particular case, if someone is coming to you distraught, well, it's reasonable for Facebook to say, we'll do something, right? It's a very obscure exemption that Facebook and Twitter and others have been using to purge political opinions that they don't like. Now, that has been a gradual process, going with the fringes and gradually moving towards more mainstream sort of conservatives. It's very much been attacking the conservative side of politics. And it's been doing it in sort of salami slices. And yet at this point, it's an open assault on the US democracy. And there is no way, by any reasonable standard, it could be interpreted as a 230 exemption to prevent the worldwide distribution of a major news story because it is harmful, quote unquote, to one political candidate. It is a massive violation of the law. So the FCC commissioner has come out publicly since in the last couple of days and said they're going to clarify what that exemption is and is not, so that Twitter and Facebook and others, won't be able to use it in the future. In the meantime, they are, as I said, being subpoenaed before the US Senate under oath, hopefully to provide testimony that will no doubt indict them and see the board and executive of Facebook and Twitter highly likely and hopefully prosecuted for high crimes against the United States and treason against American democracy. It is just the biggest corruption scandal I have ever seen, dwarfs the actual corruption scandal as reported by the New York Post. And by the way, those stories, it's like the Pelican Reef, those stories are continuing to come out. There's a story about how Joe Biden took Hunter to China, I think in 2014, something like that, after which Hunter secured a $10 million per year business deal with the Chinese, despite the fact that Joe Biden didn't actually achieve any of the things that he was sent to China to achieve, which was to convince the Chinese to stop militarizing the South China Sea, which of course they continue to do apace. So there's major questions about, okay, well, he's been sent to China to deliver an outcome for the safety and national security of America. Instead of doing that, he didn't achieve anything, but there's a compensation, millions and millions of dollars poured into his family. So these stories are continuing to come out daily. I won't be able to keep up with them here, but it's extraordinary. It is the greatest corruption of politicians that I have seen exposed in this way, dwarfing Watergate. But that's not the real story. The real story is the degree to which tech censorship has controlled people's lives. Now, 24 hours or so after they had started blocking this website and all links to these stories, Twitter blocked anyone who had shared it, hundreds of thousands of accounts, including yours truly, right? So for about a 24-hour period, hundreds of thousands of people were unable to tweet anything at all, right? I was unable to tweet out I share my video for a period of time, things that were completely unrelated, just in an attempt to suppress this story completely. Now, they've completely failed to do that, thankfully. And if anything, they have fired up to an enormous degree the thirst of Republicans to win this election because of the outrage that has been perpetrated. And there are serious implications for what has happened here that go beyond just this election itself. First of all, were Trump to lose this election, his supporters may claim with some credibility that the only reason that happened was that the tech giants had suppressed critical information about their opponent the American voters needed to know, and therefore the results of the election are illegitimate, right? If that happens, then there could be major civil conflict because the Trump camp would not accept the results of an election that was handed to Biden on the hands of Twitter and Facebook, right? That is absolutely a possible outcome. Secondly, the fact that Twitter and Facebook thought they could do this in the first place. Remember of who they're targeted. It wasn't just the fringe voices on the internet. It was the US government itself. It has set itself up to be more powerful than the representative bodies of the American Republic to decide who and what can speak and what the American people have a right or not right to hear, right? That is something that is just an existential threat regardless of your politics. And I really urge, even if you vote for Biden, even if you're a Democratic fan, understand that regulating these tech monopolies is a left-wing position. That's what the left-wing have been arguing for many years. They've said, look, these giants have too much power. They could have too much control over the censorship. They're monopolies in their own right. They stifle competition at the best of times, and they are a threat to democracy at the worst of times. And they need to be regulated and broken up. So the two things that I would like to see is the executives of Facebook and Twitter prosecuted and thrown in jail for the rest of their natural lives, and for these tech giants to be broken up for these extraordinary crimes that dwarf Watergate or any corruption scandal we've seen in many years. So please, hopefully that explains what has happened here. You can now, when you go and search for this stuff, you'll be able to get a greater sense of the backstory to this. To my knowledge, Google has not jumped into this. I mean, imagine if they did. But Google has not censored the New York Post, so you can do all the search for the stories if you want to go and look those up. And also, you'll get a sense of what's happening with Twitter and Facebook and the subpoenas and so forth. So I will definitely report on the Senate hearings as they go forward. Hopefully you found value in this discussion and you can understand why I'm so angry and nervous, and hopefully you are as well. Please do like and subscribe. Leave your comments down below and definitely address any serious questions you have. And I will see you in the next video. Thank you.